have you seen like a lot of examples of veterans that, are now coping in a different manner towards psychedelics where it's changed their life and their overall improvement in life has, improved drastically? Hey everyone, welcome to our latest TDR Psychedelic exclusive. I'm your host, Shad Dales. Hope you're having a good week. Today's podcast, it's featuring a story that was published earlier this month where the first ever guidelines of psychedelic-assisted therapy were published by the American Medical Association. What were they and what does this mean? Well, let's learn more as we welcome in our guest here in today's podcast. He's the executive director of the American Psychedelic Practitioners Association and retired Brigadier Stephen Xenakis. Good to see you, sir. And how are things?
Thank you. It's terrific to be here with you.
Yes. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that last name correctly. Xenakis, is that it?
Yes. Excellent.
So retired, how long were you in the Army for?
28 years.
28 years. Wow. Yeah. You must have seen a lot and still probably see a lot regarding veterans that are battling PTSD, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I came into the Army in 1970 during the middle of the Vietnam War. And
Wow.
I've been very involved. I retired in 1998. I had a number of different deployments, and we had all sorts of engagements. And then since then, I've been very involved with our soldiers and other service members who have served in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I've seen quite a bit over the years. My father was in the military, so I heard his stories from World War II and the Korean War and Vietnam. So this has been part of my life now for, my professional life, my whole life.
Has psychedelics changed your life?
Yes. I mean, I think from the time that we were first exposed to them in the 1960s. In other words, they gave us a window, an idea of how we can look at things differently. And that's very, very important. And that's what we're trying to do as practitioners, mental health care clinicians, is help people look at things differently so they can cope better. Yeah. And now we have the tools to do that.
Do you think, I'll get into the details of some of the guidelines that were announced by the American Medical Association in a moment, but where are we at? There's 22 veterans that are committing suicide every single day, which is a staggering stat. But do you think this has the capabilities of, I don't want to use the word cure, but a lot of people I'm learning or hearing is they're being cured of PTSD. Do you think psychedelics has that potential?
I think it has. And that number actually may be twice as large as you said. I mean, there are other reports that the number of suicides are in the 40s. And I know many of these, I've treated any number of veterans over the years. In fact, I've treated veterans who were somehow managed to make very serious attempts on their lives and lived. They've told me their stories, and they really do need something like this in order to get over, actually cope with what they're doing. Cure, I don't think, things like this imprint and affect your life forever.
So have you seen like a lot of examples of veterans that, are now coping in a different manner towards psychedelics where it's changed their life and their overall improvement in life has, improved drastically?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's encouraging, isn't it?
It absolutely is. I mean, it really is very encouraging and very positive, and should, I think, motivate us to be very committed to doing everything we can to not only the veterans, but anyone who's suffering like this.
I know. And I think Congress is listening because the current state is just, it's, even before the pandemic, this was an epidemic across North America for sure. And it's only going to get more and more challenging. So let's begin with what I said off the top. So back on August 8th, the American Medical Association and Brain Futures, which is a national nonprofit working to advance practical applications of brain research, they announced the first ever set of professional practice guidelines. So what are the guidelines and how will it work?
So these are guidelines that set the context of and formalize these treatments. Okay. These are now, we can look at what's being done and how people are being treated and say, this fits with what we know of good clinical practice. And they're the first step in being able to put a framework and set an anchor how these treatments would be conducted and provided by various clinicians. So they're very important that we have them. And they're inform our governmental agencies, and hopefully they'll inform payers and other people that this is really now a very solid way of helping patients who have problems that they otherwise feel are intractable. But we
Yeah.
have to follow these guidelines with our more detailed clinical practice guidelines. That is the actual information and that says who are the right patients. How do we know that these are the right patients? What do they really need? How do we then go about giving them that treatment? And how do we know we've done good? How do we know we've done the right thing? So that's what will go into clinical practice guidelines. And we're then going to also follow with ethical practice guidelines. So we're very encouraged by this, and we're very encouraged that it's been well received and that people respect and understand what we're trying
Yeah.
to do.
So you said ethical, and what was the other term you used?
Clinical practice guidelines.
So how
Uh,
exactly are those guidelines then structured towards qualifying practitioners?
well, there's a lot more detail in terms of what the ethical uh, rules would be that would apply as a practitioner is working with a patient. And they're reasonably concerns about touch, reasonably concerns about disclosure, about
Yeah.
informed consent, all the kinds of things. When a very powerful treatment gets in the hands of a practitioner, it is the obligation, it's the
Yeah.
responsibility of that practitioner to know that anytime you can do something that can be very helpful, it also can cause harm. So there needs
Mhm.
to be really good informed consent, and everybody needs to understand what we're doing here and why we're doing it. So that goes into the ethical guidelines. The clinical practice guidelines are let's get into more detail of who needs this and who can really be helped. What do we
Okay.
need to know about that person? And then, as we know that, how do we set up having a very individualized treatment? So, medicine, clinical practice, I'm a physician. So, I mean, there
Yep.
are other
Yep.
clinicians out there, but medicine is both an art and a science. And the patient's most important. It needs to be patient focused, patient
Mhm.
centered. And the science that we have, everything we know about these compounds and medicines, informs the art and the practice of medicine. So that's what we're trying to do with these clinical practice guidelines. And then we can go about and say, okay, you want to be trained, you want to feel competent, you want to know what goes into the training. And how do we
Right.
know that the training you're doing is the right training? How do we accredit it? So
So
that's the kind of
how
work
does
that
that
we do.
training look then? Like, is it an online course? Is it in
No.
person? What how does it work?
Well, first of all, you got to know the science. You got to know
Yeah.
about these medications. You got to know how long they've been around. You have to read about, how the treatment, how the therapy is being done, what the basic principles are. Uh, and then it really is, as I said, it's the practice of medicine. You have to treat patients and
Yeah.
treat patients under supervision and learn from what you're doing with
Yeah.
patients. You know, as the medicine, as the clinical practice works, sometimes it helps with some people, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
And you
I hear
have
you.
to know.
Yeah, I think that's often the question. Like, there's a lot of people that are interested and intrigued by it, but also very scared to try it because of the perception that, this whole psychedelic space is painted a picture, which is so far from the truth over the last 30 to 40 years. But um, it's interesting to see how you handle situations if somebody is going through a bad experience and how you handle stuff like that. And I think that's probably a common question if somebody's new to the medicine and considering it, is it not?
Yes, absolutely. And they need to feel comfortable and safe. Right. I mean, most of the patients, many patients that are really candidates for this treatment, just take the veterans, have
Yeah.
been in life threatening situations.
Hmm.
In one way or another, they've been quote unquote scared to death.
Yeah.
They know what that looks like.
Yeah.
They know their lives have been at risk. They are worried about that. either consciously or in the back of their minds all the time. So the first step is, do they feel safe? What does safety look like for them?
Yeah.
Can they trust the clinician? Does the clinician understand? This has been a huge problem in treating many of our veterans over the years, particularly early on when we had our veterans from Vietnam. And now, do you know what it's like being in uniform? Do you know what it's like being in the combat zone?
Hmm.
And if you as a therapist can't somehow show that you have an understanding and appreciation, well, that patient's not going to feel safe. That's
Yeah.
also going to go for anyone who's been a victim of sexual assault, any other trauma. Do you understand what that's like?
Yeah.
How do I know that you understand? So
Well
first,
said.
safety. They've got to feel safe.
So here's another important question. It was a hot topic at the MAPS conference back in Denver. Rick Doblin was talking about how he believes that any doctors prescribing this need to actually understand and have an experience of themselves related to psychedelics. Do you agree with that?
I think that's an important principle. Yes, I do. But that's an old principle. I mean, you can even go to something that like the area of psychoanalysis, very traditional, and a lot of people sort of disavow it. But to become a psychoanalyst, the institutes required that the trainee go through an analysis.
Yeah.
And I think actually to be a good therapist of any kind of therapy, it's important to experience that to really understand it from the inside out. So that's a very, very important point to make. And I really agree with that.
Are you working with organizations like MAPS or
Yeah.
contract research You are. Okay.
Yeah. We're not
Um,
doing contract research. We're a professional association. We're an association of practitioners. We really need to make sure that we keep ourselves in a situation where there are not conflicts of interest, where our integrity professionally is not compromised in any way. Not that any of these organizations are doing things that are illicit or illegal,
yeah.
but we want to maintain our identity as a professional association.
Okay. Want to talk about like some of the conversations I've had with veterans. The feedback I receive is that the big reason they consider psychedelics is because another veteran vouches for it. When you talk about having a therapist that can understand and relate, do you see a lot of veterans taking the proper training courses to become therapists? Because that obviously would be, I don't know if that would be the case or not, if that's something that does interest them, but how would that work? Because a lot of the times, as you said, veterans that have been through life threatening situations aren't really interested in somebody with a degree or reading a book. They want to have somebody that they can relate to, understands their sickness. And a lot of that times, it's from other veterans that have gone through the experience that vouch for it.
Well, I think that's our next step is we're going to have to examine very closely who is doing the treatment now and providing the therapy, what training they've had, and what they're doing has been helpful or not. We've just started scanning that environment, that landscape,
Yeah.
and I think we need to learn about what the depth and breadth of those people that are doing the treatment. Just
Hmm.
because you've had an experience or two, and just because it's helped you immensely, as it has helped a lot of people, doesn't necessarily mean that you can be a good therapist
Yeah.
or that
Do you
you
think
know
there's
what it is.
Do you think there's a lot of underqualified therapists that have had experience that are currently right now in the field?
I can't comment on that. I don't have nearly enough information to say.
Yeah. How many therapists do we need in America alone? There's been some staggering numbers that have been released over the last year or two, but it's, to meet demand, how many therapists do you think we need?
That's a number we're going to drill down on. I think the number is huge. I think we have a mental health crisis in this
Yeah.
country, and we know that there are hundreds of thousands of people that really want and need treatment that don't have it available. We're going to have to also figure out what's the best way to configure that treatment. Just as a number, half the counties in this country don't have a psychiatrist. The next step to answer that we're going to look at is how many of those counties don't have qualified psychologists or other counselors. So there's a huge disparity in this country between who needs treatment and who's getting treatment. We have
Hmm.
100,000 deaths a year from opiate overdoses. And that
100,000.
occurs in areas, that more often than not do not have good mental health services available to them.
Yeah.
So, look, this is a huge challenge.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to think of innovative, creative ways to configure our delivery here, provision of services, so the people who need it get it. And we're going to have to work with payers. We're going to have to figure out with the government agencies, how are we going to do this and do it from the standpoint of who needs it? The health and welfare of this country is fundamental to our national security. Now I'm
Yeah.
speaking as
Yeah.
a military officer, right?
No, that's good though.
But that that was vivid out of the COVID pandemic. What did we hear?
Is Congress listening to you? Do you find we had a lobbyist on a couple weeks ago, but are they listening to this?
I think so. I mean, there are
Yeah.
any number of people talking with the Congress, any number of people. So I think they are listening. I think they understand it.
Hmm.
But we're plowing new ground here. We're shifting the model
Yeah.
significantly.
One thing I always bring up once in a while is like, I think Congress has felt burned about how cannabis was rolled out. And a lot of times people like to compare the two industries and they're so far and few between, like, because quite honestly, there's so much data pertaining to psychedelics where I think for the medicinal side, it has its limitations towards cannabis. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've seen psychedelics. Like, do you think this is why Congress is listening a lot more because there's actual data to back up everything you're saying?
I think so, and there have been studies now for a good 20, well, actually since the mid 80s. So there's
Yeah.
been a lot of good science. The way that psychedelics are going to be set up and how practitioners are going to use it is very different from the way that cannabis is being provided. And so we've really got to get into the details here, and there's
Yeah.
a huge amount of education that with Congress and for that matter for many people in this country of how these various substances compounds are different.
Yeah. You've talked about 100,000 people dying of opioids every single year. I've heard numbers as much as 12 to 13 million Americans have PTSD. I don't know if that number is accurate, but that's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, those numbers have been around for some time. I mean, I can see where that may be the case. For
Yeah.
all the things that people are experiencing, a lot of stress in this country, a
I
lot of
know.
stress.
How long were you there? 27 years in
28
the
years.
military?
Yeah, 28 years.
So you've seen a lot, obviously, right?
I think so.
Yeah. Last thing I want to bring up, and I think most people know who follow this industry, is phase 3 MDMA assisted therapy results from MAPS are coming out any day now. And with the approval of MDMA assisted therapy, looking likely upon good results that it will be approved. If this is approved by the FDA, some people speculating Q2 of next year, that's great. That's the first step. But I think the big concern right now with people following this industry closely is the rollout because the demand is going to be immense. How do you see this rolling out?
That's why we're working on the clinical practice guidelines. I mean, what does that look like? Here we have an approved indication for this particular compound, this
Yeah.
drug. Now, how do we roll it out and actually and do what we just talked about for all
Hmm.
the people that need it? If we have, for our purposes of planning, 12 million people, where are those people? What does the therapy look like?
Right.
How do we train the folks? That's what our practitioners association is going to tackle.
Are you seeing a huge interest of people wanting to learn, sign up, and take the proper guidelines and learning course of what's required to become a registered therapist within this industry? Yeah.
I am, yeah, I'm very encouraged by it. I mean, very.
How how much, like, can you give me like an idea as to like what kind of feedback that you're getting amongst practitioners that want to learn?
They want to know how, basically what we've talked about. How do you do it?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
who are the right patients? How do we know we can get trained? How do we feel confident about it? How do we also make sure that we don't expose ourselves to more liability? And how do we know that what we're doing is going to be authorized?
Mm-hmm.
by whoever are state licensing boards, by the government. I mean, there are any number of issues that they reasonably are asking about.
So the response has been very strong then.
Yeah, it's been very nice. It's very
That's good.
encouraging.
It's encouraging, that's to say the least. Well, listen, applaud obviously what you and your association are doing. Appreciate the update. I think this is a lot of infrastructure that needs to be built, needless to say. But first things first, let's get MDMA approved. Let's get it obviously descheduled, and then we can figure out the next steps. But this is all part of the journey, right?
This is all part of the journey, and now it's just details. Let's grind
Mm-hmm.
away. Let's do good planning. I mean, it's kind of stuff that we learned and tried to do in the Army. Good idea to have. It's a you've got high aspirations, you got big goals, but you just gotta really grind away and make sure you're doing the right thing.
Being a retired military veteran, psychedelics to mental health, how much of an impact does it have on society when you think of like, I've talked to some veterans that have said this is as big as when the internet launched. This is how big this industry is going to be. Do you believe that?
Yeah, I think it's going to have a huge impact on social impact and could have a political impact in a political environment that is as partisan as it is now and as intense as we're seeing it day to day. We need to do something that people are feeling safe, secure, and healed in their personal and family lives. So this is important. This gets to the core of what it means to be a good country here, and for us to be good Americans.
That's great. General Stephen Xenakis, and also Executive Director of the American Psychedelic Practitioners Association. Appreciate the time.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate your reaching out.
I honestly applaud, obviously, everything you guys are doing, and wish you nothing but the best. But let's keep in touch, okay?
Absolutely. Good luck to you.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
So what'd you all think of the interview? Did you like what we recorded with our guests? Then leave a comment below and let us know what you thought of it. And if there's any more questions you want us to ask, as usual, share this video with your network. Click on that bell for all notifications. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel because we would not be here without you. Thanks for watching, everyone.